What are the biggest challenges for Europe? Who should try to solve them? Are we able to find solutions?
Hello. As we all know, the European Union is one of the most successful regional economic integration as an organization. They are considered the world's most powerful trading bloc, and this is not without a proof.
They account for 16.7% of global goods trade and products in their external goods and services trade that contribute for 35% of EU's GDP. However, due to the pressure from the emerging countries like China and our primary trade partners like America, the EU is left to balance their multilateral trade and relationship in a very delicate manner.
This is one of the biggest issues that EU faces. This and more will be something we would like to talk about. Hi, my name is Mark.
And I am Belgian.
In this video, we will tackle a few facts about the current challenges that the EU faces when it comes to international trade. As early 2001, China has surpassed the US as Europe's top trading partner. European Union export to China grew by 2.2% last year and import rose by 5.6%. This is a contrast with a drop of export to the United States by 8.2% and import by 13.2%. Did you know that the world trade situation has altered as a result of emerging countries' competitiveness? The developing and emerging economies account for 42% of global commercial trade flows, substantially tripling their share since 1990. China, Brazil, India are already among the top 25 global exporters, while the following 11 has begun to emerge. They are Mexico, Indonesia, Vietnam, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Pakistan.
So, China has actively increased its trade ties with the EU since the normalization of diplomatic relations between China and EU in the 1970s. So, even before China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, Chinese trade with the EU members increased significantly. The most visible economic feature linked with China abroad is the large quantity of trade it conducts, particularly in good export to the global market six in 2000. So China's export success had a tremendous impact on the European Union. So this impact has grown even stronger as China has evolved, even in technologically. So it began to sell more advanced items to the EU that putting EU companies in direct competition.
The relationship between the EU and growing economies such as China has always been complex, presenting both possibilities and challenges for European businesses and governments. The EU Trade Commissioner Cecilia Malmström has stated repeatedly that trade with China supports 3 million jobs in the Europe, and many of Europe companies gain from their presence in China and partnership with Chinese suppliers. Malmström, on the other hand, has frequently called for an end to the discrimination that EU companies face in China, where they face numerous barriers to entrance, are unable to access for the same sources of financial and local firms, and are not allowed the same degree of legal protection.
The policy has a lot of goals, and one of them is to integrate emerging economics into the global trade system, the opening of the China to international commerce in the 1980s, and the former Soviet Union and India to international trade in 1990s. So it introduced almost 1 billion participants to the global economy. So the context of the global commerce was radically altered as a result of the openness.
China's rise has occurred at an incredible rate and extended during the last decades. It is now heavily weighed on the international stage, both commercially and monetarily. China is EU's second largest trading partner, and with the EU now being the most significant destination for foreign direct investment. China also became increasingly visible in all parts of the world in terms of its international political and military presence. This China political, economic, and social development is more important than ever to Europe. So they create significant opportunities for Europe, particularly in terms of job development and economic growth in Europe, but must be tackled in coordinated and effective manner in order to produce the best possible outcomes for both UE and China. The UE and China have established a great relationship despite the competition between these two is still inevitable. From this, the real cause of challenge has begun. You might be asking what could be the reason why China is so economically powerful that it became a direct competitor of the Europe trade policy.
Before anything else, did you know that China's economic growth is attributed to the two key elements by the economists? And these two elements appear to have worked together. Economic change strengthened the economic efficiency, that resulting in higher output and more resources for new investment. So as a result, China has the greatest growth saving as a portion of the GDP. So among major economies, China has been able to sustain a large investment due to its enormous domestic savings. So in fact, China's gross domestic reserve heavily favor its domestic investment. So making it a significant net to worldwide lender. Let us look through the lens of history with the help of my friend. Kim?
China is the world's second largest economy and the biggest importer. But 40 years ago, it was a poor, largely rural nation, with at least 30% of its population living in poverty. That started to change in 1978, when China launched major economic reforms. The first were agricultural. Farmers were allowed to sell their surplus crops on the open market. Success in agriculture and more open trade led to the privatization of other state-owned enterprises. In 1980, China became a member of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. That's the same year it created 4 special economic zones to encourage foreign direct investment. As the economy opened up to the outside world, companies flooded into China to build factories and take advantage of cheap labor. Stock markets in Shanghai and Shenzhen opened in 1990. Economic growth boomed the following decade, averaging 10% a year. More than 500 million people have been lifted out of poverty since China's economic reforms began. It's been called an economic miracle, and one the global economy has come to depend on.
When the Soviet Union, the communist inspiration and ideological cousins of People's Republic of China, collapsed in 1991, they made sure to learn from their mistakes and do their best to avoid them. Those mistakes were the root corruption, oppression, and overall failed economic system. So the communist China we know today is only communist on paper but not by practice. They've been learned from the Soviet that this economic political system does not work. Therefore, they embrace a new system which they call capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Capitalism is the opposite of communist, and that briefly explain why China became an economic superpowerful.
Given that a country like China, now being a significant player on the world economic stage, is historically unprecedented. So China's investment and BRI collaboration, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. So it's shown the Western countries uncertainty about how to deal with the shift in the leadership in the economic governance. So that brought about by the China's expanding power in the Europe. With China's economic transition upgrading, Chinese business have increased their economic development based on the obtaining European brand and talent on a bigger scale, particularly in the crucial industries. So, while advocating for a greater market access in China, so the European Union has become more cautious and restrictive of Chinese investment in Europe, worried that the critical assets acquired by the Chinese companies may jeopardize their nation's security and economic.
Since market access is much more general issue, the role of Chinese state-owned businesses is linked to potential discrimination through implicit subsidies or SOEs. So basically, the nature of state-owned firm in the Europe is quite different. They are typical smaller than SOEs in China. They are most commonly found in industry that they're vulnerable and to economic breakdowns and disadvantages, such as utilities, and Chinese SOEs appear to be far more involved in manufacture than European state-owned enterprises.
The EU claims that at least in a part, because of the explicit and implicit government backing they get, SOEs confront more advantageous market trend than their private counterparts. So undermining the market efficiency, though the commerce between the EU and China has grown dramatically, so in the recent years bilateral investment has remained the modest. So outbound, the Chinese foreign direct investment or FDI into the EU has just lately begun to increase significantly, and there is growing concern about whether this trend will continue.
The European Union, as we imagine, is very successful in their way of trading, being the world's biggest trading market and helping many countries and its people from their development.
And you know what? The EU is also one of the peaceful continents. They also allow their citizens to work or study anywhere in the EU. Amazing, right?
But being a top and successful in trading, it brings pressure to Europe because of the others emerging countries like China. China is also one of the largest trading partners of Europe. So in 2020, China was considered as one of the largest exporter and second largest importer in the world, according to Eurostat.
And you know that the world economy is navigating through heavy seas at the moment. So both China and the European Union are confronted with a number of the common challenge as well as the particular domestic concern. So in order to address these successful and consistent way, all accessible policy tools have to be used in appropriate way. So this requires continued advance in implementing the necessary reforms.
Well, I think it is fair to say that we all have our homework to do, though the focus of this effort naturally differs.
Yes, in Europe, it implies inter alia that focusing on labor and product market reforms. So, in order to improve the growth potential of our economics, so in China, it means inter alia. So, reforms in financial market and banking sector. So in order to improve the financial intermediation and the monetary control.
China is currently conducting strategic economic planning as part of its 14th fifth-year plan that's from 2021 to 2025, which will mark the most recent phase of country's five-decade transition from low-income to high-income status. So in the late 1970s, key reform in agriculture and household institution were implemented. In the 1980s, support for entrepreneurship, village enterprises, and special economic zone was provided. In the year of 1990s, the financial sector was reformed with the growth of specialist bank and the establishment of three development banks. And in the year 2000, the focus correctly shifted to human capital with changes in education and increased provision of social insurance. Throughout, the focus shifted to market system and interactions with global economy.
This decade and beyond, the China next wave of economic reforms can complete the country transformation into high income. So successful economy is based on a high productivity of all main capitals. The first one is human capital. Social capitals produce or physical capital. And the last one is the natural capital.
So, in investing in and achieving high productivity of resources and investment is central to enabling the quality of economic growth, recognizing the importance of services sectors to continue at high rates with low factors inputs and to making it sustainable in both relevant of China and the world as a whole.
Investment in the high productivity of human capital, high productivity of produce, and natural capital, and the high productivity of investment. But if it's with the correspondingly lower incremental capital output of ratio, it will drive the Chinese growth in 2020s and beyond. The reform growth model will take into the account in the world that is changing more faster with the effects of technology and the climate change producing both significant disruption and opportunities as well as the significant threats.
During the formulation of China's 14th five-year plan, this effort aims to inform strategic economic planning. It emphasizes structural issue and answering for some sustaining China economic growth.
It is also looking into the ways to use the capital more efficiently across industry. Although it's largely concerned with the domestic economic planning, it is also examining the Belts and the Road Initiative, so which has a major consequences for the China's internal economy. So the consequences for the energy and the environment that are given specially to the consideration in the analysis. Since the launch of the BRI in 2013, 136 countries and 30 international organizations have signed in BRI cooperation documents. So received US 90 billion in Chinese foreign direct investment, or also known as FDI, in exchange to the US 6 trillion in the trade with China.
And also, President Xi Jinping has described that BRI as project of the century, yet the motivation aims to scope of the BRI have been continuously debated and the Chinese government has struggled to put forward a clear narrative for the initiative. So, at the time, social movement affected communist and non-governmental organizations across the globe have criticized BRI project for harmful environmental, social, and economic impact and resisted their implementation.
And now let's proceed to the second major challenge in the European trade policy, the America First and trade war.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
First, let us define what is the meaning of America First. So it is a U.S. policy approach that promotes nationalism and non-interventionism. Thus, a crucial challenge, especially as the USA was a founding member of the post-world governance system. Donald Trump, who campaigned on the phrase America First, saw international commerce as a zero-sum game, a negative trade balance in his opinion. He suggested that the U.S. trading partners were not following the rules.
During the 2016 presidential election, Trump often blamed massive layoffs in manufacturing and intellectual property on U.S. trade between China and related provisions. He accused China of perpetrating the largest fraud in human history and criticized the U.S. trade deficit with China, which reached $346 billion in 2016.
Because we can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
The trade war took place when U.S. President Donald Trump placed new tariffs on Canada, the European Union, Mexico, and China. Now, as disputes grow around the world, these countries began striking back.
The U.S. declared the biggest trade war in economic history, which includes China, European Union member countries, Canada, Mexico, Japan, South Korea, Russia, and Iran. In China, the U.S. has levied tariff on around $50 billion in Chinese goods. A second round of tariffs on $16 billion in goods is now being considered. President Trump has threatened to expand the penalties to cover $450 billion in products, which represents the vast majority of Chinese exports to the U.S.
Minutes ago, the Trump administration published a list of about 1,300 Chinese exports that could be targeted for tariffs. The U.S. plans to apply the tariffs to some $50 billion in Chinese goods as punishment for intellectual property theft. It's not clear when that will take effect.
In the European Union, Trump has called the European Union evil when it comes to trade. Europe is concerned that Washington will follow through on a threat to leave a punishing tariff on imported autos, which the big German auto sector fears the most.
The European Union is possibly as bad as China, just smaller. Okay? It's terrible what they do to us. European Union, take a look at the car situation. They send the Mercedes in. We can't send our cars in. Look what they do to our farmers. They don't want our farm products. Now, in all fairness, they have their farmers, so they want to protect their farmers. But we don't protect ours, and they protect theirs.
On the other hand, Canada and Mexico has been hit by the Trump administration's steel and aluminum tariffs, which have threatened their own retaliation.
In Japan, Trump's steel tariffs have also hit the country, which has described them as very disgusting after failing to persuade Washington to spare it from the tariffs. In South Korea, on the other hand, Trump has muddled the issue by attempting to link trade concessions to progress in his other track of discussions with nuclear-armed North Korea.
By a narrow concrete strip, the demarcation line between the two Koreas. President Trump asked and was invited to cross.
I asked him, I said, would you...
In Russia's case, U.S. restrictions targeting oligarchs and firms accused of backing President Vladimir Putin's alleged efforts to destabilize Western democracies have already harmed trade relations.
The latest sanctions announced by the Treasury Department today, impacting 19 individuals, including 47 of their family members and close associates. 8 members of Russia's elite are now fully cut off from the U.S. financial system, including Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov and Allysa Osmanov, who's been called one of Putin's favorite oligarchs.
And lastly, in Iran, Trump declared that he was pulling out from the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, putting new restrictions on Tehran and punishing those who trade with them.
The Iran deal is defective at its core. The United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
The United States' foreign strategy approach has previously been multilateral and based on principle. It now seeks to build a bilateral approach, analyzing each issue from a cost-benefit standpoint in economic and political terms. This series of ruling has been accompanied by continuous threat of putting tariffs on imported goods and in some cases, actual implementation.
Okay, we don't have to renegotiate any longer. We're going to put a tariff on all of the millions of cars you send into the United States. And honestly, he was in my office so quickly from Europe that I didn't know they had airplanes that flew that fast. I said, where did you find them?
The direct impact of this America First policy would be to lower trade loss, instability of global supply systems, and higher import costs. On the other hand, the indirect effect would be a loss of company and consumer confidence, as well as the tightening of financial conditions. Protectionism's influence on global GDP should be controlled, for if this continues at current levels or even somewhat higher, it will put US in dire situations according to the statistical studies conducted. However, if tariff protection were to be greatly increased, the situation would change at the high end of the tariffs threatened by the US administration.
Right now we have low oil prices, or relatively. I'd like to see it go down even lower, but I think that it's a very simple equation for me. I'm about make America great again, and I'm about America first.
The European Union is against the America First trade policy, and its response is threefold. First, launch judicial procedures against the USA and WTO. Secondly, target a list of US products with additional customs duties. And lastly, launch an investigation into the possible implementation of safeguard measures to support European steel and aluminum markets from the damage caused by additional imports upon entering the Union following the closing of the American market. In the short term, withholding strong actions is less spectacular and possibly less effective, but adhering to the rules ensures long-term security. However, economic operators depends on a short-term agenda, and as a result, this situation calls for the WTO reform to address the lack of emergency litigation processes in the World Trade Organization's dispute settlement mechanism.
Exchange views and seek clarification regarding the proposed measures. The European Union, a major exporter of steel and aluminium products, is extremely worried, and the tariffs would not only limit the imports of its goods into the United States, but also lead to its products flooding back into its own markets, causing an oversupply. Now, last month, the United States President Donald Trump had unveiled plans for tariffs on steel and aluminium imports, causing a global outcry and worries about a possible trade war. Now, several countries, including those in the European
The present U.S. administration's rhetoric on trade in the global multilateral system, as well as its recent actions, possess a serious threat to the globalization process. While it is critical to maintain attempts to mitigate some of the U.S. hostility, the EU must also safeguard itself. The European economy is exposed and fragile as a continent that is highly linked in terms of trade and finance. This is why it's critical to have credible tools that can be used in real time to reveal the true cause of trade hostility. At the same time, the EU must grow its commerce with other nations while safeguarding the benefits of free trade. Lastly, the EU should work to reform the World Trade Organization, or the WTO, to ensure that everyone has equitable access. This is critical if we are to achieve more evenly distributed benefits from global free trade.
Again, these are the major challenges in the European trade policy. Thank you for watching.